Now to a man with one of the world's dream jobs. His business card for National Geographic describes him as explorer in residence. I love it. For the past 30 years, Canadian botanist, writer, photographer and filmmaker Wade Davis has lived with and documented Indigenous communities from the Amazon to the Arctic, from Mali to Mongolia. He's in Australia to deliver the 2011 Thomas Foundation Conservation Oration tonight in Sydney. And he's in our breakfast studios right now. Wade Davis, good morning. Welcome to Australia.
Hello, Fran. Thank you.
Your business card says explorer in residence. What does that mean?
Well, it sounds like an oxymoronic sinecure, but, actually, we're rarely in residence. The Geographic, when it went into its second century, sort of decided that not just to tell you about the world, its mission would be to help you save the world. And so they kind of embraced conservation, and they recruited 7 people around the world to personify that mission. And Jane Goodall for primatology, and Bob Ballard, who found the Titanic. And I was just very lucky to be selected as a social anthropologist.
And very lucky indeed to have the gig, because your simple personal philosophy is follow the heart, never compromise, do the thing that fills you most with fear, risk discomfort for understanding. Not everyone gets to do that when they've got kids to feed and mortgage to pay.
Where did you find that?
Oh, we dig hard here.
No, I'm really lucky because my mission is really to celebrate the wonder of the human legacy. It's interesting that I'm over here for the Nature Conservancy, which has only operated in Australia for a decade, but in North America, it's probably been the most important force in conservation. And the fact that I'm here shows that the Nature Conservancy also recognizes that the plight of biodiversity is also sort of paralleled by a plight of cultural diversity. It's interesting. I mean, no biologist would suggest that half the species of the world are on the brink of extinction. It's not true. And yet from the linguists, we learned that literally of the 7,000 languages spoken the day that you were born, Fran, half aren't being taught to children, which means we're living through a time where half of humanity's knowledge base has been eroded, within a generation or two. And our position at the Geographic is that doesn't have to happen.
Is it, when you say half the world's knowledge base, with the languages disappearing, half of those 7,000 languages, I think you said, does that equate to, though, it's not going to have the devastating impact of it, that if half the world's species disappear?
Well, it's like sort of comparing apples and oranges at one level, but I mean, it's important to remember that a language isn't just grammar and vocabulary. It's sort of a flash of the human spirit. It's the way that the soul and knowledge of a culture comes to the material world. I always say that every language is like an old-growth forest of the mind, a watershed of thought, an ecosystem of social, spiritual, psychological possibilities. And so to lose a language is really to lose something of ourselves. And one of the incredible things that has come out of science, I think, in the last 20 years is that geneticists have proven it to be true what philosophers have always hoped. We are really all brothers and sisters. And I don't mean that in the spirit of hippie ethnography.
We come from the same DNA.
We come from the same DNA. The race has been exposed as a total fiction. The human genetic endowment is one continuum. We're all descendants of a handful of people who walked out of Africa 65,000 years ago, and in 2,500 generations settled the whole world. But if we accept that we're cut from the same genetic cloth, all cultures share the same genius. And whether that genius is placed into technological wizardry, which has been our great achievement, or by contrast, placed into unraveling the complex threads of memory inherent in a myth, is simply a matter of choice. So that old Victorian idea that there was a ladder of success that plunked Victorian England at the apex of the pyramid that, went down to the sides of the so-called primitives of the world has really been dismissed by anthropology as much an artifact of the 19th century as the idea that the world was only 6,000 years old.
But as you say, it is a continuum, and as we emerge from the same DNA and continue and split off as you've just described, is part of the continuum, perhaps, that we don't need all those languages anymore? Is that just a part of the evolution?
Well,
rather than a distraction.
But you see, that sort of touches on this idea that the disappearance of these cultures is something natural, as if they're failed attempts at being modern, failed attempts at being us. Nothing could be further from the truth. In every case, these are dynamic living peoples being impacted by identifiable forces. That's actually an optimistic observation because it's just if human beings are in fact the agents of cultural destruction, we can be the facilitators of cultural survival. Now those forces can be biological disease entities still, they can be sort of egregious industrial decisions, or they can be the sort of triumph of ideology, whether it's sort of the Marxist-Leninist model of Beijing plunked down upon the Tibetans, or the kind of cult of modernity in which we sort of, spread our notion of the world through parts of the world that, have had other ways of being.
But if everyone's culture, if everyone's belief system, everyone's lifestyle is equally valid and equal, I think that's the premise, let's take a specific example. We hear a lot about trying to save the Amazon rainforests. You say there are descendants there of a true lost civilization, the people of the anaconda. It's a complex of cultures inspired by mythological ancestors who even today still dictate that how humans must live in the forest. But in the boardrooms of London or New York, that's not going to save the Amazon rainforest. No one in corporate America or Europe is listening to the Amazon ancestors.
No, but on the other hand, the fascinating thing is it's not about the traditional versus the modern, but what kind of world do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a world where the voices of those extraordinary people are silenced? Do we want to live in a world where the Amazon no longer exists? It doesn't have to, that's not the, it's not an either or situation. And what's fascinating about those societies is they actually tell us how you can live in that forest with great concentrations of population.
It's an amazing thought after an amazing life. Wade Davis, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Wade Davis, Canadian botanist, writer, photographer and filmmaker, here to deliver the 2011 Thomas Foundation Conservation Oration. It's on tonight at the Australian Museum in Sydney, and Wade is one of the guests on Radio National's live broadcast from the Brisbane Writers' Festival on Sunday between 10am and 1pm. If you'd like to hear more of him, tune in. Thanks very much, Wade.